Hello, students. Welcome to today's lecture with me, Professor William Wright, over chapter 14 of Living with Art by Mark Getline. This is actually going to be part one of chapter 14. And as I get the slides ready, let's talk about how this is kind of like it's the second half slash like the third sort of unit that we cover. And I guess it's, even though, it is the third unit, it's pretty much half the class, but it will take us to the end. And we covered all the basic like talking points like defining art, defining the parts of art, and learning to talk about art in unit one, in terms of what is art, like how to put it together and stuff. And then unit two was talking about media and different things that are used to make art. And now unit three, or the second half of this class, is going to be art history, because now we need to take that art appreciation that we've built up through the media, and like ability to talk about the technical points of art. Now we need to apply it to some of the historical context and historical chapters in art. So this chapter 14, and this is part one of chapter 14. I think I'll take us through the first three on the list here. Prehistoric, Mesopotamian, and Egyptian, and then we'll cover the Greek and Roman worlds for the like later Mediterranean in the second part of this chapter. But as we dive into chapter 14, we're gonna pretty much chapter 14 takes us through like the vast majority of human history, and then we start to understand it's like prehistory mostly, and then the early beginnings of history, and then modern times, I guess. But before we get into that, let's talk about why we do art history, and some things that are necessary when talking about art history. So number one, an important factor in understanding understanding and appreciating any work of art is some knowledge of its place in time. Basically, you have to understand art history to understand the context of the art that we see from history, right? Okay, so you need to think about things when we look at this art, in addition to the elements and principles and media that we're learning about, you should also be thinking about its context. Okay, so when and where was it made? What traditions was the artist building on or rebelling against? So if we can figure it out, like, I mean, a lot of times the objects in art are telling us what traditions are there, like either being rebelled against, or like we learn what the traditions are based on the art. So now we have to ask ourselves, is the artist, parodying, or, lifting up the traditions? What are they building on or rebelling against, and in the place and time? So what did society at the time that a particular art piece was made expect of its artists? Again, we kind of have to do our best. Once we get into history, like actual written history, we start to understand it a little better. But at times we have to kind of guess and figure out, or apply other archaeological evidence to figure this out. What society wanted out of artists, and what tasks society gave to artists. Like, what was the job of the artist in that particular place and time according to society? What did they expect? And all of these things come together to form the context of art, its web of connections to the larger world of human culture. So it's important to look at these things so we can understand, every art piece that we look at. It might not even be particularly interesting at first sight, but as we learn and unpack context, we can learn a lot about what's happening around the art piece. And the reason, again, that we really focus on this, and it's actually one of the best parts of art history, and the best reason to do it, is the fact that art history is different from other kind of histories, in that the art object exists with us right now. And if it's existed any time in the last 150 years, even if it doesn't exist currently, there's probably a photograph of it, right? So we know, we can either look at a photograph, or for the majority of objects, we actually get to, if we found them, if we've dug them up and studied them, we could hold them in our hands. They are alive with us now. So it's almost, in a way, a one-to-one communication that occurs even when artists and viewers are separated by thousands or even tens of thousands of years, even when they're separated by language, even when they're separated by the lack of any written history. We know that the art object connects us in a way directly to them. This speaks to the communicative power of art and makes it possible for us to glimpse some of the experiences of those that lived before us, even again, if we don't understand them. It helps us better understand the societies other than our own, because not only will we understand historical societies that built our own, we'll understand the historical societies that were different from our own. And some of those historical societies will help us understand, if I can make sense of this, understand those that are around right now, different from our own, that come from those other historical contexts, if that makes sense. So we can understand other parts of the world right now based on the historical context of their art history. Better if we study it. So, and then of course, this allows us to see beyond our cultural boundaries and all that. And that was kind of some of the conversation questions I've had you do in the past. But really, this is just like a soapbox talking about how it's really great to study art history because it helps you understand perspective and culture, right? Now, before we dig into that too, this is the only time I think that I'm going to do these like kind of soapbox or setup slides for art history. But another one we need to talk about is when we study art of the past, we have to keep in mind that cultures examined are not necessarily those in which the most art was made or the best art was made, or even certainly wasn't the only art that was made. It's just the art and artifacts that we have found or have been able to preserve. Okay, so basically, we need to understand that there may have been artists that were spectacularly a million times better than the artists of the Greek world, but they made their art out of hay or some sort of ash or something that was going to eventually come apart, right? Or possibly they made it and then they weren't as strong of a military society, so then they were defeated and their culture was destroyed by a stronger society that didn't want their art to be preserved, right? You have to understand. And then there's just like natural disasters. For a really long time, Pompeii was never known because it was not found, until the 1800s, I think. So it's like, and it goes over it in this slideshow. But in any case, it's just important to know we only know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. Classic. Anyway, okay, what kind of conditions do foster the preservation of art? This looks like a really good exam question, if you ask me. So I'm going to go ahead and list those out real quick. The conditions that foster the preservation of art. Artists working in a durable material such as metal, stone, and fired clay. So basically, like I said, not in hay or animal dung, but those things go away. Number two, the local environment is not destructive to artworks. So in the Arabian desert, sand and oppressive sunlight and lack of water might destroy certain types of art. Maybe others are preserved. Who knows? We know that up in the northern Europe, there's like salt and things in the soil that when hordes of things were buried, they were preserved literally in like a encased. Same for like ancient amber and type things. Like any case, there are things that set up preservation of art, or things, if it's a type of environment where it's like artwork being made on an island, and then that island, the volcano erupts and everything gets destroyed, or the ocean covers it, right? That's not a local environment that's conducive to keeping artworks around. Okay, enough of that. The culture was highly organized with stable population centers. So this basically gets into nomadic societies typically don't have as much artwork, right? You can think about it. If you are a person who has moved a lot in your life, you probably have fewer things than someone who has lived in the same place their whole life, right? Because when you move, when things change, when there's upheaval, there's an inevitable loss or throwing away of things. This is just the way that works. So a highly stable, organized population center, it stays in one place, and then it leads to this last point, which is typically in places where they're stable culture centers. There's a tradition of storing or accumulating or caching artwork in places of limited or no access. So basically museums or tombs or things that make sure that the artwork is just stored and stays in that one place and people don't have access to it. This is one of the things that is required. Yeah, basically like nomadic societies that they don't have as durable buildings, or they don't have like if they're just a trade society, they don't keep a lot of things. These lead to the loss of objects a lot of times. Okay, in any case, let's set up digging into art history, and I'm going to start by talking about just kind of the way that the world works in the Ice Age and the expansion of humankind in the best ways that I can, because I am still, not an anthropologist. But in any case, we do know that the Paleolithic period, which means the Old Stone Age, Paleolithic, Old Stone Age, that's when we see the first paintings and sculptures. Now, at this time, you can see, because the glacial maximum, it was actually still growing down at 30,000 BCE, and it reached its maximum at 18,000 BCE, or I guess about 16,000 BCE. Because of this, the majority of works and tools and things that we have found from the Paleolithic, they're sort of oriented around the middle of the planet, right? Because especially like Southern Europe, the Mediterranean, North Africa, and down to the equator, because, and in North Africa, nothing, really so much in Canada, just Mesoamerica, Central America, because there was ice keeping people from moving further up and having any kind of culture. Now, there's not a lot that was kept because it was nomadic materials. There wasn't a lot of technological advancement. But yes, in the Paleolithic period, we see the first paintings and sculptures. They're kind of oriented around most of the ones that we've found so far that we understand, we've actually had time to study, are in Southern Europe on the Mediterranean or North Africa. Now, there are, things that we've found in North America, but a lot of those ended up being destroyed, or we never understood what they were for, because the people were decimated by disease or whatever, and cultural move in of the Eastern civilization into the West, all those things that happened. We do know now that Australia has some artworks that are just as old as those in Southern Europe, and so that's an interesting thing, but we haven't had time to study those yet, so we're still gathering information. But in any case, ice begins to recede after the glacial maximum at about, I guess, 16,000 BCE, and the onset of a temperate climate begins to take over in Europe. So there's less chasing your food and more abundance of resources happening there, and that begins, and kind of takes place, as we move from 10,000 into the 9,000 BCE time frame. I guess that would be the 10th millennium. Now 10th millennium BCE. Now the Neolithic period, which is the New Stone Age, which basically is detailed by the transition from simple stone tools, just like hacking, like hand axes, to actual stone tools that are, spears and arrows and lateral throwing, things that are more advanced stone tools. With handles and things, they begin to be manufactured in the Neolithic. And then because of this, we start to see early farming communities begin around 7,000 BCE, and that's when we start to see more stable and common goods and art materials. Now, I love this stuff. I'm sorry if it's a bore for you. I hope you skip this slide or something, but no, it's important to understand the progress. And then the Neolithic reaches Europe and the Mediterranean, which again, I actually got a little soapbox here too. I forgot to mention that we are going to focus in this particular slideshow on the Mediterranean world and Europe as sort of like the beginning of Western civilization and art, because, well, just mainly because it's the thing we have the most information about. I don't want you under any circumstances to believe that I think this is the only stuff that was happening, or that this is the only place that it could have happened. The rest of the world was having their own growth of artistic cultures and technology and things like that. Like I said, the Near East begins the Neolithic earlier than Europe, and Mesoamerica had its own growth, and we're going to talk about those things briefly. But unfortunately, by virtue of the history of our country and the history of the Western Hemisphere and all these things, we are going to focus a lot on the kind of typical Western civilization through line. It's not all I'm going to talk about, but there's going to be a lot of it. So, until we gather more information, we're probably always going to start our art history courses in the Mediterranean and Mesopotamia. I mean, we're not even really starting in Europe. We're starting in Mesopotamia and on the Mediterranean. But I just want to give a preface that, and I'll give it again tomorrow when I introduce chapters that are not about just Europe and other, there are actually about other parts of the world. But in any case, just understand it's where we focus, but things are happening in other parts of the world. In any case, that's enough of that. Moving on, I want to talk about some of the earliest known artistic sites that we know about right now. So, of course, as I said, they're mostly in Southern Europe. One of the earliest ones is the Lascaux Cave. There's two cave paintings that are considered some of the oldest art in the world. It was discovered. It was called the Hall of Bulls in the Lascaux Cave. The cave was discovered by four teenagers in 1940. Just kind of exploring, and they found this cave full of paintings of animals, and it was figured out that it was from a great long time ago. And actually, it was after the last glacial maximum, but it was 13,000 BCE. Real quick, too, let me recover. BCE is the same as BC. And then you'll see later when we get to AD, it's actually called CE in historical anthropological timeframes. It's an attempt to make sure that it's not an overly Christianized timeline that we're always looking at. Basically, they went from, we can't change the fact that most of our calendar as we know it is oriented around, the spread of Catholicism and Western civilization. And so rather than change all the time, the years and things like that, we changed the title. So BCE, instead of before Christ, we now say before Common Era. And then when we get to AD, Anno Domini, after Christ, we now call it Common Era. So BCE and CE. So BCE is the same as BC. In any case, it's just the way that anthropology is working right now. And we should also remember none of these people were sitting around wondering, like, why is time counting down? No, they had their own definitions of time and all that stuff. But yeah, in any case, when we look at the Lascaux Cave, are these animals symbolic? What do they represent? Are they mythical spirits, or is spirit context? Is it a way to make sense of the world? Is it an effort to exert control over nature? Is it cause and effect? Are the deep recesses of the cave gathering for some ritual occasion? These are all very spiritual answers to the potential for the creation of the Lascaux Cave. There's also, maybe it was a guide. Maybe this was like the first blog about how to hunt the animals that you see on the cave walls. I'm just offering a functional practice, maybe because I'm a potter. I wonder about the practical part. Now, we do know throughout the majority of human history before modern technology and science, and when people were following their food around, there was a lot of reverence for animals, and they mostly did have animal-based worship or connect their spiritual worldview to animals. But in any case, in the Lascaux Cave, we see what looks like rhinos. We see maybe water buffalo. We see aurochs, which is like the original cattle that was, like giant, like 17-foot cows or something like that were all over Europe. We see ancient horses, which would have come from the steppe. It's good to know horses were not a North American animal until they were brought from the Eurasian continent. But there are stag, there's elk on the Lascaux Cave. In any case, we get a good view of, and also understand that there's many sections, many galleries, many painted parts. So this was a well explored and well understood and well used cave system, which does lead you to wonder: is it some sort of ritual or more, or like I said, is it like a guide? I don't know. Who knows? We talked about all the possible purposes for ancient art, but yeah, that's what we ask ourselves with the Lascaux Cave. But then in 1996, an even older set of cave paintings was discovered in Chauvet. We've looked at this one before, actually. It's the one with the lions that are sort of stacked up awkwardly, and the rhinoceri, if that's what you're supposed to say, just sort of spread across the wall. And this one's definitely focused on animals, and it looks like some sort of stampede or event of some kind. Now, with this, we actually also find areas that are painted. Most of these are just painted with natural materials, charcoal, iron, different colored rocks, but we see an actual handprint, which is just pretty amazing to think about, ancient people's handprints being sort of outlined here on this wall from 30,000 BC. It's even older than Lesso. But in any case, some other objects that we see, some early sculptures, we call them amulets or fetish. They're typically, we kind of think of early sculptures as some sort of good luck charm. Obviously, there's earlier sculptures that are more functional, like tools, but like hand axes and things like that. But we don't really call those sculptures as much as we do, something like this that clearly is all about the artistic or spiritual function. The Venus of Willendorf was discovered in Austria, actually. Although potentially may have come from North Africa, I think is part of the understanding. And they have other similar ones dated to between 26,000 and 24,000 years ago, or down to 20,000 BC. But it's a common type of sculpture amulet, this female figure that we see across ancient Europe and potentially in parts of North Africa. And in any case, we see some of that growth in artistic cultures, more sophistication developing. We also see it shouldn't be ignored that during the Paleolithic, stone tools were advancing. The atlatl was designed, which was an early form before they had bows and arrows. They actually had this thing. It's a dart thrower. It's basically for small spears, but it's this little notched stick that basically you hold onto a handle, and it makes your arm twice as long. And while I'm sure they didn't understand all the exact science of it, basically it's the idea that, when you extend, I guess, like the fulcrum, it increases the acceleration of the tool that you're projecting, your projectile. And in any case, they figured out that you could hunt much more accurately and vicious, I guess. Like, there was more power behind projectiles that were thrown with an atlatl rather than just your arm. So we see early atlatls in combination with artwork, more sculptures about animals. We've seen previously the swimming reindeer sculptures. We see that buffalo sculpture. We see bull sculptures all the way, over to India and Asia. And in any case, atlatls, there's this really cool video on a guy throwing an atlatl. It's pretty cool. You can see, like I said, it just like extends your arm and you can increase the speed and power of your projectile. So it's pretty cool. You should, if you go to the slides on our classroom, you can watch this video. It's like 1 minute long, but it's pretty cool. In any case, that gets us through the Paleolithic. Let's talk about the Neolithic. The Neolithic begins around 9,000 BC in the east, and over the next 5,000 years, which we always are like, oh, no big deal, 5,000 years. That's longer than we've had written history. That's crazy. Well, yeah, as far as we know. In any case, over the next 5,000 years, the Paleolithic period begins to end, and the Neolithic begins spreading westward, right? And so that's the new Stone Age. This allows new types of stone tools, learning to cultivate fruits and grains. Farming is born, right? You have plows are being invented rather than just weapons for killing. We have weapons for digging up and tilling the earth. We start to domesticate animals so that we don't have to chase them down. We start to have boats and bows and arrows that are much more efficient, and you can, make projectiles quickly, and it's okay if you lose them. And of course, my personal favorite, the technology of pottery. We have this understanding that pottery basically is one of the things that allowed us to stop having to chase our food around, because we could start putting it into the jar and protecting it. We could even bury it and keep it cool. We could do things that we previously had not realized. And this is part of the transition to Neolithic, creating pottery and more sophisticated stone tools. I like to think about the first guy that had just made a mud basket and accidentally tripped and got too drunk or something and burned down his hut. And then when it was all burnt down, they found these perfectly fired ceramic bowls or something. I don't know. I've heard that story before, and it's kind of fun to imagine. Although, of course, we never will know how they figured out how to make pottery. But in any case, this leads us up to the Mesopotamian. As we get through the Neolithic era, we start to look at the Bronze Age, the Iron Age. As we close out, past 4,000 BC, we start in the 3000s, we start to have bronze and an early metal formation. And this gets us to these characters here, which we'll talk about each one in turn. If you ever see the word Neo in front of something, it's basically just saying new Sumerians, right? So the Sumerians lost power to the Akkadians, and then there was a group of people who thought they were the ancestors of, or the descendants of Sumerians. So they take back over. Then the Babylonians take over, and then the Assyrians, which are really Akkadians that they speak Akkadian and they run the country or run this the Fertile Crescent area, and then they give way to the New Babylonians. In any case, the area that made up Mesopotamia, which is, or the Fertile Crescent as we like to call it, the meeting of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, these areas, there were not a lot of natural boundaries beyond those rivers. This made it hard to defend and very easy to invade. You could just walk right in. There wasn't any kind of natural boundary that kept you away. So there was a lot of contention back and forth, a lot of flip-flopping. And it's important to know that kind of still continues today. The Fertile Crescent, which goes from the Persian Gulf over to the Mediterranean Sea, it included Palestine, Jerusalem, Phoenicia, Assyria, Akkad, Sumer, and actually Assyria is modern day Syria, and Sumer is modern day Iraq. And so a lot of these places, are still, a big part of cultural development today. In any case, yeah, here's a map. I love maps. I love timelines. You might get tired of that, but yeah, you see here's the Persian Gulf. Iraq is basically Samaria. Iran, I don't know if it was on here. Yeah, Iran was already on here. It's basically ancient Persia, and Syria is ancient Assyria. In any case, there's a, dang it, I did the thing again. There's a back and forth constantly between the different cities and populations. We start to see early artworks, again, going beyond just pottery and painting and sculpture. We start to see writing systems develop. The earliest writing system in this area is known as cuneiform. It is the wedge-shaped system of writing used in ancient Mesopotamia, especially Sumeria. And you actually start to see a development from pictographic lettering towards, where it's literally like the picture of the word head is just a drawing of a head. And as we move through time, you get to true writing systems where it's actually just a random set of marks and symbols represents head. To walk is initially a foot, then eventually it's a series of marks, right? You see that development. Barley was a stalk of barley. Now it's like these, diagonal marks. In any case, you see the development towards, from pictographic towards, dots and wedge shapes that create a form of writing. Now, it's good to know in these days it was every word has its own symbol. So rather than what we have, which is like 26 letters of the alphabet, they would have hundreds and hundreds of symbols that represented each word that they used in their language. So it was still kind of complicated and difficult to decipher. But the Epic of Gilgamesh is written here on this stone tablet. It is amongst the earliest surviving works of literature. Begins with 5 independent Sumerian poems about Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk. You can look up that story, kind of on your own time, but it's just an ancient telling of it's our first basic ancient story that we have, the oldest one that we have. In any case, the Sumerians don't just contribute writing, they also contribute the stepped pyramid or the ziggurat. In Mesopotamia, we call it the ziggurat. It's a monumental step structure symbolically understood as a mountain and serving as a platform for one or more temples. It's basically a building that they built to look like a mountain, right? So it has caves, it has halls, it has things you could walk through. They built their cities and temples of adobe and stone, mostly adobe, but we do have some stone structures. But in any case, these stepped pyramids, they are load-bearing construction, just stacked up material, again, to look like a mountain, look like a multi-level pyramid. This is in the 3rd millennium BCE, so around just a little past 2000 BCE, so a little bit after the pyramids actually, but this is we know this design, it comes from the Sumerians, in terms of Mesopotamia. In any case, we also see works of art that are going beyond just, the fetish or amulet with some sort of specific spiritual purpose, because we start to see basically rare goods, right? We start to see goods that beyond their function, because of their rarity, because of their shininess or brilliance, in terms of lapis lazuli, this beautiful blue, these kinds of materials start to be uh, kind of highly regarded, right? So it basically now art can become a way to flex and show how rich you are by using more gold, more blue, and it's more now about aesthetic. It's still building on understanding of the world. We have this ram in a thicket, eating from a tree. That's a cool kind of new thing to see depicted. But it's also important to know, it's really all about the materials. It has been lost, much like the famous head of the Akkadian ruler from the National Museum of Baghdad. They were both featured in many textbooks. They're both now missing, with up to 170 other pieces of art. And typically in class, I ask, why would this happen? Why would so much be missing from Mesopotamia? It's sort of given away in the name Baghdad, though. Most of us in our lifetime, I know in my young life, I know we saw the invasion of Baghdad and the subsequent anarchy, I guess, that reigned. And basically, in 2003, during the Iraq War, the Iraq Museum in Baghdad was looted, right? So the city basically lost the ability to, maintain itself, and people took advantage. And many of the famous, if they weren't destroyed in bombing, I mean, let's face it, there's a chance that some of that happened. And in any case, some famous monumental, the Uruk vase from 3300 BCE, that's like smack in the middle of the Bronze Era. It appeared in every survey textbook and is one of the earliest narrative works of art. The beautiful carved marble head representing a great Sumerian goddess Inanna. Also from the sacred, it's all this artwork that's from the sacred precinct of Uruk, which was Sumerian, Babylonian goods, all housed in the Museum of Baghdad and other museums in Iraq. Basically, they were just lost. Hopefully, we'll find a lot of it. Anything that wasn't destroyed potentially could be recovered in time, but right now it's sort of lost, and we're finding it. But at least we do have photographs, and we can study it here. In any case, one of the ancient artworks that I want to cover as we move towards talking about the Babylonians, which are in the early days of the second millennium BC, 1700s, we see Hammurabi's code written on a stela, which is basically just a fancy word for a stone tablet. It's a written law, and it actually gives us the first glimpse into basically a society saying, you know what, we can't just all do whatever we want in any moment to moment. Of course, that may have been happening earlier, but they didn't have it written down. Finally, somebody said, "Hey, let's get together. Let's write a code. Let's write it down." And Hammurabi was the king of Babylon at the time when he created this set of rules and wrote it down. So in Mesopotamia, we see our first law code, and again, it's our first law code in Mesopotamia. Who knows what's happening outside of it? But in any case, yeah, we see this developing. It's our first glimpse into a society trying to organize itself. Then, after the Babylonians, we move to the Assyrians. I'm not breaking down each group specifically. So we're down to the Assyrians, which are basically Akkadian kings who kind of come back and they take over that area north of Babylon, and Babylon is kind of in its purview. But the Assyrians take over. We've already seen some art about the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal. Killing the lions. The lions represented Persia, which I already said was, part of Iraq or Iran. Sorry. In any case, we see the Assyrians expanding on pyramids, stepped structures, ziggurats. Actually, the story of the Tower of Babel is most likely linked back to the time of the Assyrians or late Babylonians. But in any case, we have all these great reliefs that we've seen all over the world. We also had all kinds of sculptures from the ancient site of Nimrud, which was an Assyrian kingdom And actually, they have replicas of these in Fort Worth that are really worth seeing. They're the Lamassu sculptures, among many other sculptures that were also lost in the last little bit. When ISIS invaded the city of Mosul and attacked the ancient site of Nimrud, they, as part of their cultural decision or part of their platform, they believed any depictions of living things, any animate beings, man, animal, anything, and especially if there's any kind of reverence for it, or if it, if it's non-Muslim in its origin, even if it is Muslim. They don't. We'll talk about later that animate objects are not a part of their cultural worldview. But in any case, they destroyed a lot of these in 2015 during that invasion. So again, these are also lost. Although we do have some things that survived. The Ishtar Gate survives from the time of the Assyrians in the city of Babylon. It was it was the eighth gate to the inner city of Babylon, but it was constructed at about 575 BCE by order of King Nebuchadnezzar. I think this would have been Assyrians or maybe Neo-Babylonians, but in any case, it was actually moved to the Pergamon Museum. You can't see it in this slide. Maybe it's in the slide that uploaded, but it's in Berlin. So this ancient Babylonian artifact did survive. It was not damaged, and we can still view it. We can see these beautiful ancient blue and turquoise decorations that would have been used. It's pretty amazing to think of entire cities made in this. This blue and turquoise was a big part of Babylonian and Assyrian architecture. And again, remember, like I said, the Tower of Babel is often considered a part of Assyrian history. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are another part of those histories. Both of these were considered wonders of the world, but they are now lost, like the Colossus of Rhodes and some other things that are happening around this time. But we know, parts of them have survived, and we hear stories of them. But this is an example of artifacts that we only, guess we have the Ishtar Gate to give us an idea of what it looked like, but we don't really, have many, obviously the city's changed and time has changed. In any case, that gets us to Egypt. The principal message of Egyptian art is continuity. It is a seamless span of time reaching back into history and forward into the future. Basically, Egypt of the pyramids is Egypt of today. It's one of the few parts of the world that it's never changed its names. Lots of things have changed about it, but the cities, the rivers, the things, they remain the same. And the culture, while it has developed, it's still Egypt. Okay, so it's a seamless span of time reaching back into history and forward into the future. One of the big things that we see, is a part of Egyptian artwork is their highly decorative arts. We see a lot of their pictures and the way that they decorated things tells us a lot about the ancient world, as well as they're one of the good examples of having stellar grave goods that helped us study Egypt and understand Egypt better. Now, in terms of the decoration of things, we should know, obviously, we start to have a more advancement in writing systems. They move from determinative symbols, which is what I was talking about, where they start with, one symbol means one word. Then they move to syllabic symbols, which is basically each sound you make with your mouth or each sound of a part of a word has a symbol. But then they develop actually the first alphabet, right? So they're slowly reducing the number of symbols you have to use to create a written language, and they develop into what we know as the alphabet. Now, this is North Africa, and it's developing at the same time as Greece. Phoenicians also get a lot of credit for the first alphabet. They're probably developing simultaneously, or independently, I guess. In any case, but hieroglyphs are, one of the things you absolutely have to know about the Egyptians and their writing symbols. It's their symbols or pictures. In any case, another thing to remember about Egyptian art is, another contribution is the hierarchy of scale use. We've seen in other cultures, but I like to highlight it in Egyptian. And it's just harkening back to, when they tell their narratives, when they tell their stories, they use the proportion, of importance being larger to signify that they are more important. Like a king being bigger, or like we've talked about, baby Jesus is a great big. Now that's kind of getting through their decorative arts, but let's get into the grave goods and the architectural feats. Obviously, the Great Pyramids are the standout when talking about the architectural feats of the Egyptians. The pyramids are built throughout the, I guess, 26th century BCE, from 2570 to 2500. These are the Great Pyramids. There are lesser pyramids out front, but the Great Pyramids, they're load-bearing structures, just stacked stone, and yeah, basically they are mausoleums. They are tombs, right? And this is, part of the greatness, that allows Egypt to be studied so well. The tombs themselves are the pyramids themselves are built like dunes. I always kind of like to think of it, and I'll highlight it, showing another pyramid in a minute. The Egyptians kind of used the geography around them to decide how to build their structures. But yeah, here in Giza, we have the three pyramids. Now, just to go through some quick facts of the Pyramid of Khufu, it was originally covered in limestone, white limestone, so basically bright white plaster, similar to a lot of Greek and even some areas of European like structures, hill forts and things that appear later on. This coating of plaster gave it a bright, brilliant white appearance. The length of one side of the base is 775 feet. The maximum error between sides is less than 0.1%, which is just nuts. It approximately covers 13 acres. It is 450 feet high, originally 480 or 48 stories. It's over 2.3 million blocks of stone, each weighing 2.5 tons. How they move that is just insane. The average joint fitting is less than 1/50th of an inch. That's by today's standards, just wild. The base is so perfectly square that it is and level that it is successfully or was leveled so successfully that the southeast corner is 1/2 inch higher than the northwest. My house right now, which is far less than one single acre, doesn't it has more than 1/2 inch unlevel between the sides. Your house probably does too. It's an insane architectural feat to get that little settling and movement in a 13-acre structure. It originally had a gilded capstone to reflect the sun. They venerated the sun and its movements. Estimated completion time was 23 years, so most of the people who worked on it never even got to see it finished, unless they started later when they were young. But yeah, that's yeah, and it's interesting because all of this, and honestly, it's like mostly a solid stone structure, right? There's not even that much interior space. But this interior space was a grave. There was there's a false tomb, there's a real tomb, there's a couple tunnels dug by thieves. It's pretty amazing. In addition to the pyramids in Giza, we also have the Sphinx, built out of limestone. It shows a little bit of a continuation of that veneration for animal spirits and things like that. It's the essence of stability, order, and endurance. The symbol symbolizes the most important characteristics of Egyptian art: that endurance, that stability. Yeah, and it's also just an amazing sculptural feat. We start to see in Egypt some development of sculptural technique. Menkaure and his queen, this sculpture was buried aside his pyramid, and we see some anatomical development that, like he has musculature, he has kneecaps, he has, facial features that are somewhat accurate. They have nipples, right? It's getting more and more accurate. Even the seated scribe sculpture is developing in terms of anatomical accuracy. Another great tomb or pyramid, in essence, is the Temple of Hatshepsut. This one I like to highlight because it's a tomb that highlights, rather than the dunes that the pyramids are in, it looks like the cliffside that it has been built into. It's not far from Karnak. And inside this temple, we see some amazing plaster fresco drawings. We see, again, like bright, colorful development of their narratives and their storytelling, mixture of writing and visual narrative. We also see inside some of these tombs what they call shabtis. They're basically little deities or grave good characters that are like servants or minions for the deceased should they need labor in the afterlife. And yeah, they're housed, as jars and things. I used to be obsessed with those jars that were in the movie The Mummy that, had all the parts of the body after it was mummified and all that stuff. Brendan Fraser, Mummy, back in the 90s. Anyway, check it out if you haven't seen it. But in any case, we've for a long time been obsessed with the visuals and things that the Egyptians had in their graves. They also continue to develop their sculpture. This visual of Nefertiti and Amenhotep. They were married and ruled in a way together. We start to see basically a veneration of the monarchs, a veneration of governance. It developed in Egypt. We also see, just to highlight another type of sculptural technique, sunken relief. This sunken relief of the two royals we just looked at, Nefertiti and Amenhotep. Right, yeah. It's sunken relief is just a carved relief. Nothing is added to project. It's actually just carved into the stone, so it's a flat surface carved into. Worth kind of knowing about as far as vocabulary goes. Then to end Egypt, let's talk about King Tut. You can't talk about Egypt without talking about Tut. He was discovered by the archaeologist Carter in 1922. By far the most well-preserved tomb in the Valley of the Kings. It was protected from thieves. It was protected from looting. It was in a hidden chamber that was, obviously not found for 4,000 some odd years. But we see very well preserved grave goods that we get a look into the life of the ancient Egyptians. We also see this immaculate, amazingly decorated, highly gilded with turquoise elements, like really highly venerated sarcophagi that King Tut's mummy was placed in. We also see on this some indication of the political development of the time in that King Tut's headdress in the tomb and on the sarcophagi is it has a cobra as well as a vulture, which symbolizes that he ruled during a unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, because the Lower Egypt is espoused by the cobra, the Upper Egyptian, the Upper Nile Valley is, housed by the vulture. In any case, another Egyptian archaeologist that should be mentioned alongside Carter, as they begin to break down the grave goods and understand things, was Zahi Hawass, the Egyptian archaeologist, somewhat like a Indiana Jones character of sorts. But yeah, he worked for the Minister of State for Antiquities Affairs. He was the Minister of State for Antiquities Affairs, and he along with Carter, they excavated, and of course, a broad team of people and specialists that helped understand King Tut's tomb better. And we actually even have the remains of Tut that we can build a recreation off of it. He was well known to be somewhat deformed and have a lot of health problems. He died very young, most likely due to inbreeding. I don't want to speak on what I don't know a lot about, but I know that there was some inbreeding in the familial lines, little Targaryen-esque stuff happening, and it led to some forms of palsy and deformation. And I think the Habsburg jaw, which is common for royal inbred lines. In any case, that kind of wraps up Egypt. Next, we'll cover the Aegean, but we'll cover that in part 2. So I'm going to go ahead and end this recording, and I will see you in part 2. Thanks.